Welcome back to Under the Lens. Mr. Kohli is still with us. Now we'll soon take up the issue of private banks and foreign banks. Ever since the private banks were given entry into the system some 20 years ago, they've increased their presence substantially. At whose cost? At the cost of the government banks. This is in spite of the financing being a bit costlier and not having such a large branch network as some of the government banks. Reasons appear to be twofold. Quality of service seems to be an issue, and lack of embracing modern technology. While private banks have made the banking experience a very nice experience by the way they plan their offices, etc., the way they train their staff, government banks don't seem to have done it. Secondly, government banks have not accessed technology. Foreign banks had ATMs 20 years back, and government banks are only now starting to have them. No wonder in the stock market, the price earnings ratio of a HDFC bank or Axis Bank is 30, while that of UCO Bank is around 10. Now, we will discuss all this with Mr. Kohli, but remember as always that you have your section 2 where we will deal with your questions. All that you need to do is to email your questions to underthelens@utvmoney.com. Mr. Kohli, before we enter into this entry of private banks, you were just saying something about the issues on financing of infrastructure.
I think world over in developed economies, the infrastructure funding is done by the funds from pension and insurance funds. The banks are giving a short-term loans, and thereafter they float bonds for a longer duration which are subscribed by these institutions.
So some asset liability mismatch has to be solved. No?
That is a big issue.
That is a big issue.
And I think the
Today
bond
the
market
people who are financing are getting 0 to 5 year money. The projects require 10 to 15 year money.
And I think when you are giving a loan for a shorter duration, it creates two problems. Once they will ask for more for viability gap funding. That affects the government exchequer. Or they will levy heavy user charges. That will affect the general public.
The cost of the project.
General public also, because they have to pay higher.
I hope government addresses this. At least
I think that is now.
Your company, the one which you were running,
I think also
is one of the major steps in that direction.
I think there has to be alternate source of providing long-term funds. Maybe now I think Planning Commission has floated a paper of having $11 billion long-term infrastructure.
Montec has always been talking about it, right?
So I think there have to be alternate source of funding of infrastructure projects, and bond market has to be developed.
Has to be done. There have to be bonds to finance, not commercial lending. Mr. Kohli, now getting back to this, what is the thing that government banks can do? I mean, they're trying to do something. The way these private banks are running, the speed with which they're running, there are going to be some more of them, it looks like, in the next few months. You have run one of the largest government banks in the country. What should they be doing to keep their market share intact?
Actually, now the things have improved. If you would have talked about 7 or 8 years ago, I think then the situation of public sector bank vis-a-vis the private sector banks was bad. In 2001, the public sector banks went for a VRS, resulting thereby that 12.5% employees opted for VRS, and that transformed into technology. PNB, which was headed by me, went into CBS in 2001.
So first you had to get rid of the excess staff and then bring in the machines.
No, but now I think the situation is that because the average age of the employees of public sector bank is very high, at 50 or 52, and you can't change the attitude of people at this stage. But I think now the lot of people have retired, and there's a need to infuse fresh blood.
Why don't the government banks to change their method of recruitment? Like go to business schools and get smart people, motivated people.
That is being done now, but they went to the business schools. All the public sector banks are going to the business schools for having the, but still I think there is a disparity between the salary and perks of public sector bank vis-a-vis private sector banks.
And the look and feel of the banks now. I mean, I know you did something to the PNB branches. I mean, they look very swanky, the one in Connaught Place, for example. But why can't the look and feel of these banks be made,
Everybody now understands that they have to improve
Everybody
the
has to market himself.
And I think, but I think slowly and steadily, I think things are improving. And I think the public sector banks have done quite well in the terms of...
If you were to give one piece of advice to all the CMDs of PSU, what advice will you give them?
I think there is a need to infuse fresh blood on a regular basis. And you have to increase the customer base, and that could be done by the use of the technology. So you should transform technology for increasing your bank business.
And to reach out more. I remember Citibank with 4 branches used to have clients all over India just through ATMs. Right?
And I think that's the reason if you go study the public sector bank, their fee-based income is quite low vis-a-vis the fee-based income of the private sector bank. That is one area.
Remittances, transactions.
Because that translates, because the private sector banks have got more young blood than the public sector banks. And the young people, they want modern banking. So I think
it's a service sector industry. No? I mean, it's really the people that finally matter. The money is commodity. I mean, the rupee note looks the same.
But things are improving now because I think when I was chairman of IB in 2001-2.
Wait, chairman of IB
and then Indian Bank Association, then the deputy chairman planning asked me that the Indian banks public sector banks are not known all over the world. But I think now, all public sector banks are known all over the world. And I think they have got strong risk management systems. NPA level is much lower. But of course, there is a need.
So if you're an investor, let's say you're an investor, you have a choice of a public sector bank and a private sector bank. And it's just your money. I mean, no emotion, nothing. What will you buy?
That that has to be specific bank. You can't, of course, I can't say that you only buy private sector banks and you buy public sector bank. That has to be bank specific.
So you don't know.
Bank specific.
You don't know.
They say in PNB, I think now the number of customers is about 61 million. That means you are catering the more than 6% population of your country.
Just one question on the subject. This whole money matter scam, corruption and so many big public sector. You think that's going to affect public sector banks, I mean the image, etc.?
I think there's some one or two instances don't affect the image of the public sector banks. I think the basic thing is that the business has to be mobilized by the branches or the regional or the zonal managers.
So people will say it's one local affair, not the. Okay.
This is only some or one or two instances.
Okay, it's a bank. The organization is too big too.
The public sector banks I think we are very strong.
Totally out of time. Viewers, we'll take a very short commercial break, but we'll be right back with your questions. And just to remind you again, all that you need to do is to email your questions to underthelens@utvmoney.com.